I work for NetGuardians, and today we will be presenting to you about mobile banking fraud and how we can, work towards giving you or sharing ideas about prevention and best practices around this channel. Before we begin, just some few rules, about 3 of them. One is that your phones have been muted. And for those who would like to listen in through the computer, there's a button. Instead of calling in, you can actually listen through your computer. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them with us through the chat feature, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available early next week together with the presentation slides. And any questions that we will not be able to address during this webinar will be taken care of during the follow-up, when we are sharing the presentation and the webinar. We'll have 2 speakers today, a collaboration between Sysmosoft and NetGuardians. Sysmosoft will be taken care of by Mark Vincent, who is the partner and co-founder of this company. He's a mobile banking expert. He also heads the integration and support unit within the institution. And myself, John Kiptum, risk consultant for NetGuardians, my experience being around operational risk. So our agenda for today will be 7 items that we'll look at. Widespread, but at least we'll be able to share with you the best practices. So number 1 is just the quantum, just have an understanding about numbers and where we are heading in terms of mobile, and the risks. Number 2, challenges that we see in the market and having interacted with customers, both Sysmosoft and NetGuardians. Number 3, we look at some mobile risks. Number 4 is how to mitigate these risks and the control that we put in place to manage this risk. Number 5, we look at a real use case. 6, we look at some latest technology techniques to try and manage both the fraud at the first line defense and the second line defense. And finally, Q&A section. So just a quick overview about this quantum is that where the world is heading right now is moving away from the traditional banking methods. So every financial institution in the banking sector is incorporating all these mobile channels just to be able to, this being the customer experience age, to give customers, a good way of interacting with the institution without necessarily being physically present. Of course, banks are really focusing on innovation investments through, we see these big institutions having an innovation team, an innovation, unit that really handles all this stuff to do with innovation. And mobile banking technology is really picking up. And why? We see now clearly that there's an uptake in mobile banking, and it has really caught on in most countries around the world. According to some statistics on your right there, mobile banking is expected to grow from 0.8 billion users in 2014 to about 1.8 billion in 2019. This is an exponential growth just in 5 years. There are also new analytics initiatives that banks are putting in place, and all this again will be channeled through the mobile channel, whether it's your iPad, your phone, any form of mobile device. And finally, you can see there on your right that from the US, branch teller transactions per month declined from that number, 8.9 thousand to 6.4 in 2015. And of course, this will keep on reducing further. And this really is good. It's showing that the trend in the world is moving towards mobile technologies. There are 3 ways in which mobile banking is deployed to customers through wireless application protocol. So you basically have a browser on your mobile phone to your internet. Secondly, another way is through USSD, where customers use a short code, *45#, something like that, and they're able to access all these menus where you can view your statements, you can conduct transactions, you can do queries, you can discuss with the customer service support in your institution. And finally, and what we see a lot these days is downloadable smartphone applications. So you go to Apple Store, you go to all these stores that have these mobile applications. They're user-friendly, they're customized, and mostly used for smartphones. So the USSD option is mostly used where customers do not have a smartphone. So most banks deploy either of the two solutions, but at the end, it's still mobile banking. So I'd just like to introduce Mark from Sysmosoft, and he will be taking us through, the first line mechanisms. Mark, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you, John. Unfortunately, I see the slide that is a little bit weird, but okay, it's okay. So I am the co-founder of Sysmosoft, and Sysmosoft is working since 2010 in mobile security, especially on application on smartphone, such as iOS and Android devices. Our core business is securing mobile application, and we secure mainly application for financial institutions. So to increase revenue and boost productivity, our customer wanted to develop mobile application in order to give access to sensitive data, even critical data, to their employees first, to relationship manager, independent asset manager, and of course for their customer. So when we are talking about employees, we have use case such as accessing CRM or KYC application. When we talk about independent asset manager, it's mainly application for onboarding. So it's not only for internal asset manager, but also for external people. And finally, of course, and this is what I think on the right, you have the application for the end customer, which is really important to deliver new digital experience to them. Such application can be banking application, portfolio viewer, or the use case we will see just after, digital callback. John, please, if you can go to the next slide. So, of course, this kind of application, for example, is not vulnerable against a SIM swap attack. It's something we will talk after. But as you can see, there is a Gartner report which says that 75% of mobile applications just fail basic security controls. Especially when you develop an application, you have to face new threats. And if you know about the OWASP Foundation, you can go and see the list of the top 10 mobile risks. These risks can be simply just strong encryption of communication on the data on the device, strong authentication, and correct session handling. So when you develop such application, of course you have to follow the security standard. Some of you probably do the security with MDM solutions such as Mobile Iron and AirWatch, which is good when we are talking about your internal employee. But when you have to secure application for external people or even your customer, you cannot imagine to take the control of their device with the MDM solution. So that's why for them, security standard is really important. Then client data protection or customer identification data are really sensitive information. For example, when we are talking about onboarding application, you will have picture of passport, the name of the customer. So all these data are really, really sensitive. So it's not just following security standards. You need to have to reach a next level of security. Of course, when we talk about mobility, that means you would like to have access to this data anywhere at any time. but anywhere can be an issue for some regulation, and so you have to comply to your country regulation. For example, in Switzerland, we have the FINMA Institute that established some cross-border rules. So, for example, you would like to avoid your application being accessed from outside the country, or not just disallow the access, but just filter the data when you are outside the country or when you are not inside the working hour. So, John, you can move to the next slide, which is about our solution. So at Sysmosoft, as I said, we are specialized in mobile security, and we developed our own container, a kind of out-of-the-box mitigation tool to secure and make compliant your application. So with our solution, you will have directly out-of-the-box strong authentication, data in transit and data storage additional level encryption. When we talk about encryption, it's really important to talk about how the keys are generated, because you can have really strong keys, but if they are hard-coded, it's really useless. So here with Sysmosoft, we have a full solution managing your keys, and everything is under control of the company. We have a real-time geofencing business rule engine, so you can really make accurate rule for cross-border rules. So you can even restrict the usage of your application within your building or your country or your city. Some of our customers don't want to have their application on the App Store because, of course, if the application is on the App Store, that means you can have an attacker that can download it and try to reverse engineer it and be able to do some attacks. So at Sysmosoft, we offer an enterprise store system which allows you to deploy your application to your customer and to your employees securely without having to deploy it on public stores. Of course, an application must be executed in a safe environment, so our system also protects your application against hacking, pen testing, and forensic tool. For some of your customers, especially in the Gulf countries, we are even able to integrate their own cryptographic stuff. So that means you have exactly the same application, but for example, we can use the national cryptographic algorithm. So I just finished my presentation, and I will come back to you after for a demonstration, and I will give back the control to John for the common use case.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was quite, quite insightful in terms of what can be done from the first line mechanism. And I think in summary is that we still have to secure the kind of applications that we give our customers because that is where it all starts from. That's why we need to address some of the concerns around the risk of this mobile banking application. So OWASP is a good idea for those who are thinking about deploying mobile solutions, already have. I think that would be a very good place for you to understand whether the vendors who provide for you these solutions are already protecting your customers, even before you think about after the fact, solutions. So we'll just look at a common use case. It's very popular this across the world. Usually referred to as the SIM swap. This has affected all markets across the world. So we thought it's a very good use case to discuss and highlight it directly to what we'll be presenting today. So here we have a UK bank client who learns that his account has been taken over. The overdraft limit has been increased tremendously, and they have lost $6,000. As usual with fraudsters and frauds, there's never a chance of getting your money back. So we were looking at what possibly happened, and this is usually what happens across. So the fraudsters will obtain the personal banking details used for basic security questions. So for example, your date of birth, your last few transactions, personal identifiable information. And then they will use these details to request for a new SIM card from the provider. So the fraudsters call in, pretend to be so and so, give out correct answers to these security questions that they have already gotten a hold of, and then from there on, the SIM card is swapped. So they will then be able to intercept any calls, any SMSs that are coming from now your bank. Then thereafter, they will register you for mobile banking without your knowledge, without your approval. And of course, banks, as we know, are moving towards seamless or STP kind of transactions, as Mark has just demonstrated to us. That banks are now moving in terms of registration, in terms of KYC, where there is no interface with the bank. And then, the person who lost money was registered for mobile banking, and then the account was linked to to Apple Pay, or it could be to betting sites. And then you go on of course, they go on a shopping spree, and in a matter of 1 or 2 hours, this money is cleared. And it's pretty simple. Once they have access to your mobile money account, they will be able to pull critical transactional information like balances, last transactions. So they'll essentially have taken over your bank account. So what were the red flags when we look at such a case? And this is very popular, as I said, across the world. Suddenly, in terms of beneficiaries, these were never used beneficiaries. So you will suddenly realize that your account was used to go to Apple Pay, to betting sites, to pay for all these things. They will go to stores that you have never used before. You will see multiple transactions going to similar account names, or even different account names. So this will probably be again, this is a case of spiderweb kind of transactions. The account balance will be wiped out in a very short period, normally within 2 hours. Because by which time, if it's during the day, you will realize that you're not receiving calls, you cannot make calls, you're not receiving any sort of communication. And that's when you will probably find out that your account has been swapped. So the fraudsters usually take between 1 hour and 2 hours to wipe out your funds. But in this case, the transaction took place at night. So this is a very classical case of most frauds, where you have new beneficiaries that have never been used before. Transactions are taking place at night. It's being sent to multiple people, generally with below radar kind of transactions. So in a banking setup, any transaction above a certain amount will probably attract some form of scrutiny. And these fraudsters working with insiders will know this kind of limit. And therefore, they will try and transact just below that limit. We've also mentioned the issue of velocity. You'll suddenly see quite a number of transactions in a very short span of time, which is unusual. So what could have been done to prevent this? Between NetGuardians and Sysmosoft, and where we share same building in Switzerland, there's what you call real-time transaction blocking. And it is absolutely based on profiling the customer behavior. So the red flags I've mentioned will generally be outside the normal customer's profile. Transactions being done at night, those are not things that people do at night. For example, you're sending to new people. Generally, the people who you interact with on mobile banking will most likely be the same. So if you have like two, 3 new beneficiaries in a short span of time where you're just pushing transactions, that will not be typical customer behavior, because fraudsters are in a hurry to clear this out. And then basically what NetGuardians will do is they'll be able to integrate with your switch for mobile banking transactions to be able to capture this transaction before it hits your core banking, where the accounting entries will present a final position to the customer in terms of accounting. So we integrate with your API, pick these transactions as they're coming in, analyze them as regards the risk score. So every transaction is scored and given a risk rating. And if it surpasses a certain threshold, that transaction will be frozen until it is approved. And then thereafter, the transaction can be complete. Mark, maybe you want to comment on digital customer callback?
Yes, so it's really good when you can block a transaction, but unfortunately, you can have false positive. Yeah. For example, if I am going to vacation, it can be unusual for me to do a transaction from a foreign country. So then if I do such a transaction and the transaction is blocked, I have to call my bank, and the bank needs to have a help desk to help me to release the transaction. So that's why at Sysmosoft, something we will see just after, we are able to digitize the callback. So in a way where when the transaction is blocked, so we can give back the power to the end customer to release the transaction after verification.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And then just as I've just demonstrated a short while ago through the discussion, is that some of these profiling controls that we have in place, the whole idea is to be able to capture fraud as it happens. And that is only the best approach, because if you try and review transactions through reconciliation, for example, as a detective control the next day, it's generally a case of a little bit too late. Maybe the first transaction may go through, but any subsequent transactions must not be able to go through because the customer will complain, the bank will be at a case of reputational risk damage, the customer will have lost money, and the bank has to refund, because the customer can easily explain that my SIM card was swapped, these transactions were done without my approval, therefore I'm not responsible for this. And Mark has mentioned the issue of regulation. If you look at some of the regulations that are coming out now, the banks are being tasked that they must protect the customer's funds. And now the push is on using these new technologies like big data that NetGuardians is working with, big data technologies, doing advanced analytics, using profiling, to be able to adequately capture issues as they happen. And these are some of the profiling controls that we build on to be able to capture this situation. And I think, Mark, you were speaking about digital callback, but this looks good. You can explain it?
Yeah, so this is how the Sysmosoft and NetGuardians work together. So the idea behind that is when a transaction is detected with a high score by NetGuardians, the idea is to offer the possibility to the backend system to lock the transaction, and then to put the transaction in our product staging area, where we will do our job to validate against the customer that this transaction has been really done by him. Then, when everything is all right, we can give back the response to the backend system, and then he can process the transaction.
Great. So I think in collaboration with Sysmosoft, they will take care of the first line defense. As we know, operational risk governance usually says that for you to adequately and properly have an effective control environment, you must combine all levels of risk mitigation, both at first line. So from an application layer where Mark sits, this is first line. So you will do all you need to do to make sure that all these transactions are and the application is secure. On the second line defense mechanism, then NetGuardians steps in and applies customer profiling controls. So this two combination is what will be able to give you an effective management over any risk in the mobile control environment, in the mobile processes. And this is why we are saying it is important that you look at both ways in terms of managing risk around this channel. And this is not only for this channel, it's generally across all processes and products that the bank is offering its customers. You must be able to have both, two-tier approach. And the third line defense is audit will just come and ensure that first line and second line actions are effective in terms of protecting the bank. The benefits that we just gonna have to look at, about 5 of them, is that with this kind of approach, you empower customers with fraud prevention. There are also opportunities for customers to be able to, foresee some of these things when they are coming through. So if you're, for example, your SIM is swapped, the bank should be able to protect you from fraud. Secondly, is that one of the other benefits is that there's an enhanced customer experience. Of course, nobody likes to have their account wiped out because it takes you back. There's an investigation process that has to kick in. It will require law enforcement and so on and so forth, by which time you're losing time and effort and you're also stressed. Thirdly, is that the benefit is that we're able to prevent internal and external fraud. Internal fraud is one of the webinars we carried out last time. It purely addressed some of these concerns like data leakage, like collusion, that speaks to, like, for example, if somebody is able to pull out a customer information from the backend, then NetGuardians is also able to capture such situations, because this is when they share this information with the fraudsters, and fraudsters use that critical information to now call, the mobile provider and answer some of this set of basic questions. It also reduces the operational costs. It's obvious that when fraud happens, there's quite a lot of engagement all over the place. Everybody is running to mitigate either negative publicity, prevent customers from moving their funds. Customers now start to prefer walking to the branch. So those are the kind of things that increase your operational costs. And one of the benefits is, of course, to negate that. And in terms of false positives, and we are saying that this is, sometimes you have false positives and false negatives. But in terms of benefits and profiling, is that profiling is a dynamic understanding of customer behavior. So anything that deviates from that norm will be captured. The case of, for example, limits. Most banks set limits by which they will start reviewing transactions above those limits. With profiling, every customer limit is defined per the customer, as opposed to just, a one-time, limit for everybody. And this is somehow one of the ways now to reduce false positives. So the bank will probably be left with only managing what is critical or what is a risky situation, and therefore better deploy their resources to managing this risk. Mark, I think this is where you take over in terms of the demonstration by Sysmosoft.
Yeah, so I will just show you the whole callback visually is done. So is based on our brand new product, the Sense Smart Contract.
Okay, sorry, Mark, just 1 second. Yeah. Could you please share your PowerPoint presentation? The slide.
Me, I don't have the slide, but I will share my screen now.
Yes, please. Please share your screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So just let me. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna show you how our demonstrator works. So as you can see here is my mobile phone, my personal mobile phone. You can see my little king on it. And I wanted really to do it with my personal phone because when you would like to release such application, the bring your own device philosophy is a must. Okay, you cannot force your customer to buy a dedicated device for just doing transaction validation. Okay, so here I will show you how our demonstrator works. So I will simulate two kinds of transactions. So this is one user when I do transaction in Switzerland, and another one from when I am doing a false transaction. As you can see on my phone, I just received a push notification, okay, asking me to validate something. So I will start the application. So the first step is to do a strong authentication based on the PIDO Alliance requirements. So the PIDO Alliance is a foundation in the United States that says how strong authentication can be done with biometric stuff. So we can use the biometric for this application because behind that you have the full stack of security provided by Sense. So I will authenticate myself against the application. Then Sense is doing his job to do everything to control that the smartphone is not rooted and to encrypt communication and all that stuff. And here you can see the two contracts that are currently on the staging area. So you can see here the first two callback with the authorized signer, which is me, and waiting for the response from me. So, for example, I can see, okay, this is the kind of transaction I do usually from in Swiss franc to UBS. So I will say, okay, it's okay, I will accept it. On the opposite, for example, okay, I never do dollar transaction to HSBC, so I can simply refuse it. So then, if we go back here to the staging area, you can see that the first one has been accepted and the second one has been refused. And what is really important with Sense is that we have a technology of mobile context forwarding. And as you can see here is the context of my mobile. So you have the client time, you have the country. So the country can be based on the IP address or on GPS. And you can see the signature of the validation for 100% non-repudiation. What is really interesting with context mobile forwarding is that we are able to send that context to NetGuardians product to have even more accurate rules. And so even if the customer accepted once, you can still have other set of rules after that can still say, okay, even if the transaction has been validated, we still think that there is an issue. So, John, you can proceed to the end.
Yes, kindly send me back the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You can make me presenter. Okay. Thank you. I have it now. Okay, great. I hope now you can all see my screen. And this is what Mark has been demonstrating to us, how the first line defense mechanism will work. So in terms of, I can see we are coming shortly to the end of the presentation. The closing remarks, and then we'll take your Q&A. We'll take in some of the questions. And for those that we will be time barred, we can pick it up and respond to you because we have your email addresses. Okay, so we know that you must know your mobile risks to ensure that you have a secure mobile banking experience as an institution. And I think Mark has shared with us, the OWASP website. We have regulations that are being released, like the FFIEC regulations from the US, that speak from application security to customer data management to preventive controls, detective controls. So all this whole suite of prevention mechanisms, detective mechanisms, you must know them so that you can address in terms of managing that risk. Secondly is that you must have a process of proactive data monitoring approach. Proactive meaning that before the transaction hits your core banking system. Proactive in terms of ensuring that your mobile application has met the ISO standards and it is secure. Because generally what we see from the institutions that we deal with is that with a proactive approach, you are generally able to save yourself 80% of the issues that come through. However, if you have a detective approach after the fact, maybe reconciliation or any other method of waiting for the customer to complain so that you take action, and you do not have a proper corrective action plan process. Generally, that institution will always be, be dealt with a lot of fraud. And finally, that we must be able to use latest technologies. And this is why in most banking institutions, you have an innovation arm, and their work is basically to bypass all these bureaucratic processes of, developing new products, and so that these innovation teams can go ahead and use innovative technologies. We've just mentioned a few like Sense that Mark has been speaking about. We have big data technologies, we have profiling, and we have artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. Some of these are the new technologies that are helping us fight fraud. And as you can see across the world, there's a lot of fintech activities, and there's a lot of budget both from government, from private investors, from banking institutions, to take advantage of all these new technologies to help not only fight mobile banking fraud, but generally fight fraud, because it is something that is really affecting the institutions negatively. And I will just jump to some of the references, and you will receive this in your next week, the presentation, is that you can look at, for example, some of the Juniper press releases, some research. They do a lot about cybercrime, and cybercrime is one of the biggest issues right now all over the world, where we see that cybercrime has now been institutionalized. It's now, governments are now forming teams to conduct some of these negative cybercrime activities. You can also look at the report to the Nations 2016 report. You can look at best practices for mobile banking. You can look at FFIEC that I mentioned on e-banking and wireless banking for that matter, speaking to mobile banking and what is required as best practice. And the last one there is just the use case where we borrowed as one of these cases to be able to describe to you. And Mark, you can talk about this. Mark, you there?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes,
yes, so just a few words about Sysmosoft. So we are active from 2010, working with financial institutions, mainly in Switzerland, but also in the Gulf countries. So our vision is really to secure any application on any device for any users, which is really something really important if you are thinking about MDM installation. It's really to help you to mitigate all the risk with our Sense technology. So that means you can really concentrate your effort on the business value of your application without taking care of the security. You let that to Sysmosoft to take care of your security, and you can ensure, as it has been already audited several times, that all security audits will be fulfilled successfully. And also what is really important is to avoid impacting the user experience, because most of the time you will have to deal between the comfort and the security. What we try to do at Sysmosoft is really to provide you the best in both, for both subjects, so to have the maximum security with the maximum comfort for your user, whatever could be the application and whoever could be your users.
All right, thank you, Mark. And just quickly about NetGuardians. NetGuardians is a fintech company based out of Switzerland, but with the branches all over the world. We have branches in Africa, we have in Singapore and Poland, where we have our R&D. We've gotten quite some awards across both Europe and Africa, and we're working very closely with institutions across the world. Some references here for Sysmosoft. They are managing, HSBC private bank arm. Pete Gallant, which is also a customer of NetGuardians. We have BCN. For NetGuardians, we also share some customers like BCN, Pete Gallant, together with Sysmosoft. And in Africa, for example, we have Swazi Bank, We have Central Bank of Swaziland, we have Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, NIC, and so on, National Bank of Malawi. These are some of the customers that we also, share with Sysmosoft. So we'll go into the Q&A section. I'll just pick a few questions from the floor, and just 1 second as I pick this. The first question that I saw is whether we are able to detect a case of because when there's a new SIM swap, usually the transaction will come with a new IMEI identifier number, which will basically be a red flag. So for example, if you see a new IMEI number, you'll be able to detect that as a key input in the profiling, because with the profiling you can easily be able to pick that as a dynamic identifier. So incorporating that with things like the transaction amounts, the beneficiaries, the time these transactions were being done, together that it's a new IMEI number, yes, we will be able to pick that.